Hi, everyone. My name is Desiree Crow. I'm a professor in the School of Public Affairs and co-director of the Center for Community Safety and Resilience, and which is hosting tonight. We're really excited about tonight's conversation about gun violence prevention policy. As we all know, gun violence is an incredibly complex problem, and policy solutions have been tried at numerous levels, and everything from mental health to weapons bans to securing schools and everything in between. So tonight, even though a lot of attention is paid towards some of the most high profile, contentious, and therefore intractable parts of this problem, like assault weapons bans and similar, tonight we wanted to try to find some common ground and to have a conversation around where there are possibilities for cooperation and successes as part of this addressing gun violence. And so we're excited that our panelists have all agreed to be here. We have one more who's just parking, as the dean just mentioned. I'd like to thank Dean Teskey for moderating tonight, but also welcome Provost Nakuma. Thank you very much for being here tonight. We appreciate your support. Tonight we have four wonderful panelists. Mayor Mike Kaufman, the mayor of Aurora, and has really seen a lot of this, the gun violence issue up close these past couple of years as mayor. We also have Jason McBride, who will be here in a moment, who is a violence prevention specialist with the Struggle of Love Foundation. And then Christopher Nepke. Very close. Okay. Knopke. Oh, I always do the, yes. Who's an assistant professor at CU Anschutz. And then finally, Don Reinfeld, who's the executive director of Blue Rising Together, that advocates for gun violence prevention policies, solutions. So with that, I will turn it over to Dean Teskey, but thank you very much for being here. Feel free to get up and grab snacks and drinks while we're having the conversation, and there will be time for Q&A at the end.
Thanks, Desiree. Thank you, Desiree, and thanks all of you for being here. And Desiree is co-director of a relatively new center on community safety and resilience at the School of Public Affairs. Sheila Huss is co-director. Sheila got sick today and couldn't join us, but they put this great panel together. And I want to thank all the panel in advance, but also especially Mayor Kaufman, who's actually up for re-election in this election cycle. And so he's either very confident in terms of being here, or he's just very busy, and we really appreciate that he could fit in some extra time. So yeah, as Desiree mentioned, I have three prepared questions that I think were shared with the panel. They're pretty general, and I'll just go back and forth down the group, but panelists feel free to add to things other people said, or agreeably disagree if you feel that you want to do that, or add things along the way. And then we will, the last 10 or 15 minutes, ask for questions from the audience. And I don't know that it's big enough tonight that we need a microphone, but in advance, I would just encourage questions that are more questions than statements on what, of course, is a very difficult and controversial topic. And I think as Desiree mentioned, gun control issue, right? There's Second Amendment freedoms and individual rights. There's others who feel, guns should be controlled much more carefully, and a broad spectrum in between, I think, that we'll be talking about tonight in terms of what actually works and what's been tried, what could be tried, what the research shows, what evidence shows that the folks on our panel know about. And I'd also stress, I think we have some people online. We're also recording this for Zoom, and so we'll continue to speak in the microphones and do all of that when we can. So my first question of three, and they asked me to suggest you limit your answers to 4 or 5 minutes for each of these, just to keep to time. Obviously, gun violence encompasses many different forms, from mass murder that we hear about to homicide, domestic violence, suicide, accidental deaths with guns. And there are many risk factors that range from individual level risk factors to family, to school, to institutional urban factors, societal and cultural influences. So this large and fairly complex scope of what we think of as gun violence can sometimes seem overwhelming. But in terms of the way you think about gun violence prevention policy, what is missing, and what types of policy responses might we be thinking about that currently aren't, we aren't doing or aren't trying? And I'll start with Mayor Kaufman, if that's okay.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for hosting us this evening. Appreciate the opportunity. So I think first, in terms of gun violence, we're very concerned about the city of Aurora. We have programs for youth violence prevention. Oh, I forgot to turn it on. As well as youth violence prevention, as well as what we call youth violence intervention. But we have I would say right now our problem is handguns on the street, as well as the ghost guns that I really want to thank some of our partners here for passing that legislation, where you can have young people that are of an age where they're not eligible to own a gun, or people who can't pass a background check or ineligible because they're prior felons, are able to bypass the system and get ghost guns, weapons that are non-serialized, that one could buy the parts over the internet and put them together. And so, that is that's an enormous problem, a growing problem for us. I would say it's an enormous problem right now, but we're trying to get on top of it, and hopefully the legislation that was passed in the last session of the General Assembly will make a difference in that. But if you look at so right now, there's gang violence that's principally with handguns, and so that it's almost like people purchase them, straw purchases. If you're familiar with that, where somebody can legally buy a firearm and they give it to a minor who can't legally possess a weapon, and so it's very dangerous with our gang violence as well. If you go back to the big incident we had in the city of Aurora, the really tragic incident was in 2012, where we had a mass shooting in the theater. And the tragic part about that was the individual in question was in fact seeing a psychiatrist who was a student at the University of Colorado in the Anschutz Medical Campus, who was seeing a psychiatrist as part of the benefit of being a student, the healthcare benefit. And that individual had reported his fantasies of violence and things like that. He was accruing lots of ammunition and firearms at the same time, had reported him to law enforcement, as was required by law. The challenge is that she reported him to law enforcement for the University of Colorado, which has jurisdiction for the CU part of the Anschutz Medical Campus. When he dropped out of school, they just closed the file, tragically, and didn't share it with the Aurora Police Department. And so, so another, I think, one of the successes in Colorado, I think, is risk protection. What do you? The full name here. Was it?
Extreme risk.
Yeah.
Protection.
Extreme risk protection as one of the tools to identify people and to take away their firearms if they're a risk to themselves or a risk to somebody else. But I think, and I think we have to have, we've dealt with the ghost gun issue. We have to see how far that goes. I do think we need stiffer penalties for prior felons that are caught with a firearm that aren't able to possess them. And so, but anyway, I think might be a discussion for another day. I did raise that with the legislator who informed me, well, I don't think that the General Assembly is interested at this point in time in raising penalties for what might be a majority Black and brown defendants. But let me just say this, that a lot of their victims are Black and brown. And so I hope we don't look at it from that lens when we're talking about enforcement issues, having tougher enforcement issues and how that might apply to people. I mean, I don't know how we do it without having tougher penalties. But gun violence is a part of our, an unfortunate part of our city, as it is with many other urban areas. But we may be a suburb. We're the 51st largest city in America, and we have the urban challenges of race, poverty, and crime. And part of that, unfortunately, is gun violence.
Great. Thank you, Mayor Kaufman, for getting us off to a great start, and also mentioning extreme risk reduction. I know Professor Konopky and our Sheila Huss, who helped organize this but is sick, just got a very large National Institute of Justice grant to study this issue, particularly in Colorado. And so there'll be some good research coming forward on how these policies are working or not working. But next, let's go to Jason and your thoughts on some of the issues that are highlighted or that we're not focusing on as much.
Well, definitely thanks for having me. I'm sorry I was late. It's a madhouse outside, so trying to find somewhere to park is crazy. But my thoughts on it are this, and I'll kind of piggyback off of what the mayor was saying, is that we have a huge ghost gun issue, and I've testified on the last two gun legislations here in the state. The problem that I see, and I work in youth violence mostly, 100% is where my field is. The ghost gun thing is a huge problem, and I think it's a bigger problem than a lot of people understand. I think we've done legislation for high caliber magazines, for these different things. What we need to do is start holding these entities that are letting our children learning or teaching our children how to make guns, start holding them accountable. And what I mean by that is that if we have a young person that, gets involved in a shooting, in a gang shooting, in any kind of violence, if we can research what that person was looking at, did they learn how to make a gun on YouTube? Because I know kids, I've run out of fingers counting the amount of kids that I know have made guns, because all you need to do, you can 3D print the parts, and that's what these kids are doing. That's the new hustle. They 3D print the guns. You need to order one part offline, and you don't need an ID and anything. It comes right here. 2 years ago, the cheapest guns on the streets of Denver were AR-15s and AK-47s. Wow. The cheapest guns. So when the mayor talks about handguns, yes, it's mostly handguns when we talk about gang violence, but that is crossing over too. Davari Armstrong was killed by an AR-15, and the young man that killed him the AR was almost as tall as him. So we have to do a better job holding entities like YouTube accountable. If like I said, if somebody is doing that and learning how to make a gun on YouTube, does something stupid, we need to hold YouTube accountable also. Yep. Because they're allowing young people under the age of 18 to access information on how to make these weapons of mass destruction. And so we really need to do a better job of holding other entities accountable. And we don't do that at all. We will hold the person who did it accountable. We'll hold their family accountable, their neighborhood, their race sometimes, but we don't make the people who are really directly, kind of responsible for this, accountable. And if you learn how to make a gun on YouTube and you're not of age, then YouTube needs to be held accountable too, because they need to do a better job of making sure that content is not available for anybody under 18.
Thank you, Jason. Chris, your thoughts on this?
Waiting for my bat. There it goes. Okay. Thank you very much for having me. I want to also thank Dr. Huss, who isn't able to be here, but extended me the invitation. I very much appreciate it. I'll just say I'm also here representing the University of Colorado Firearm Injury Prevention Initiative, a brand new initiative based out of the Anschutz Medical Campus, led by Dr. Amy Betts, Joe Simonetti, and Aaron Kelly, and others, where we just attempt to take a science-based, apolitical view on preventing gun violence and death in all of its forms. And one of the things that I want to sort of say at the outset is, the frame from which a lot of my work comes from, which includes work both in Colorado and California on extreme risk protection orders, and as well as voluntary temporary storage of firearms for people in crisis, is this recognition that 60% of all gun deaths are suicides, and that proportion is actually higher here in Colorado. So there are gun violence and the harm associated with it is multifaceted. The issues that lead to any unfortunate incident, any bad outcome associated with gun violence is also multifaceted. And so I think that I'm proud that we're all here talking about similarly multifaceted solutions. When it's becoming more and more popular, including by the Colorado Office of Gun Violence Prevention, to think about gun violence through the lens of public health. And I think that's a useful way to sort of not only think about the things that we're doing, but the things that could potentially have greater impact. And one of the, we do, there's a little bit of work everywhere. And, we've talked a little bit about, say, like ghost gun bans, assault weapons bans, background checks, things like that are universal prevention, right? Those are the very high level policy kinds of interventions that we think about. And those, of course, have a huge place in gun violence prevention. We also think about what you might call tertiary prevention, which is the prevention for those who have been affected. So those are things like prohibitions against firearm ownership among people who have been convicted of felonies, people who have been involuntarily committed for psychiatric holds, things like that. But there's this middle ground that I think doesn't get quite as much attention, which is secondary or indicated prevention. You might fit extreme risk protection orders into this. So this is somebody who is at risk of some sort of bad outcome, where you target whatever the intervention is. But there's other things that could fit into that, and that's where we at the University of Colorado and other places have looked at voluntary storage changes for people who are either at risk themselves of suicide or violence, or someone in their household is at risk of suicide or other violence, and thinking about the ways in which we can empower communities of firearm owners, of firearm businesses, of others who might be involved, including law enforcement and everybody else, to help out in as many ways as they can.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, the suicide numbers are very, very frightening. Dawn, your thoughts on this?
So what I would say is we've done a lot in Colorado over the last, really since the Aurora shooting and since the legislature makeup changed, to focus on what I call like the regulated gun market, where people are legally trying to purchase firearms. And we've done a lot to kind of tighten that up in a way and get more aligned with other states. And I think that's been really important. But at the same time, the thing that I don't think we've focused enough on, but we started last session with the mayor and Jason, we worked on the ghost guns ban, which also bans switches, which turn basically a handgun into a fully automatic gun. And so what we're really starting to focus on, and I think there's a lot that needs to be done, is the flow of illegal guns, like the Jason and the mayor said, because we need to get at how especially young people are getting guns and how easy it is. And part of that is we have to start holding social media companies accountable for the role that they're playing in basically an unregulated gun marketplace, and quite frankly, drug marketplace, the same things. And that is our focus with Blue Rising actually in the next legislative session. And the Ghost Guns bill really laid the framework and the foundation to be able to start holding them accountable and also forcing them to a new standard of behavior. Like, for example, you can sell a gun 10 times on Facebook without being kicked off the platform, even though they say they don't allow gun sales. You can do that 5 times and call for violence at the same time before they'll kick you off. And that's really unacceptable given how easy it is for young people that are at risk for violence for them to access guns, and then also to be able to go on YouTube and learn how to put it together. I have a friend whose 14-year-old best friend died of a self-inflicted gunshot wound, and he had watched a video on how to break into your parents' gun safe. And so his parents had done the right thing. They locked up their gun, and their 14-year-old was able to access it and kill himself. And so that kind of, I think we need to have a two-pronged approach where we are tightening up our regulated market. But if we're not addressing this whole other thing that really is, quite frankly, what is impacting the daily gun violence, then we're not doing enough. It needs to be a bigger web.
Great, thank you.
Let me touch on something that she said. There's two things, and there's two examples that I'll give you in what Don said. Snapchat. I have to make up a character on Snapchat so these kids could, because they won't be themselves if they have me as a friend. So I've been on Snapchat, and the phrase that pays on Snapchat is mom, M-O-M. Some of you are mom, right? What that means on Snapchat is metal on the market. And so these kids are selling guns and say, mom, serious inquiries only. And then you're like, well, what does that mean? Metal on the market. Metal on the market. And it's not an urban legend. Also, in various communities around this country, in communities that people look like me, there are several incidents, and you can research this. There are several incidents of people just finding cases of guns just being left in the streets. We've had that happen in Green Valley. If you don't know where Green Valley is, it's in far northeast Denver, and it's an area where over the past 5 years, the kids are the youngest to be involved in gang violence. They're the youngest to be killed, and they're the youngest to be the perpetrators of those things. So, every time Tanner has a gun show in that area, shootings go up. So we need to do a better job of having organizations that have, God bless you if you're selling guns and you're doing it in a legal way, but keep it out of communities that are having issues with those things. So Tanner needs to find other places to peddle their wares, because we also have kids. The new hustle is kids are staying legit out of trouble so they can go to these gun shows and purchase guns for their friends. So this is a big issue, and a lot of things. It encompasses a lot of different things. Social media, like I said, and Don said, Snapchat, Facebook. These kids are selling everything from themselves, drugs, guns, weed. You never know. Kids are smart, and they're doing it in ways right up under our noses that we haven't figured out. So we have to be better parents. We have to be better teachers. We have to be better administrators, police, everything that is involved with these kids' lives. We have to be better because we are failing them in every aspect of it.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm hearing some strong themes of social media and ghost guns. Question number two, and we can start with Dawn and go the other way, is something you've already dug into a little bit in terms of effective and ineffective policies. But in recent examples in Colorado, maybe can you find some that have worked really well and some that have not? And also, I'm always interested. If Colorado is doing a great job or a better job potentially regulating guns, but Wyoming isn't, or some neighboring state, is that a big problem, or is that more of a myth? I know that's a new question that wasn't on for prep.
Yeah,
So
no.
answer which parts of it you want.
Well, I would say that last session, we passed raising the age of purchase to 21 for guns, which was kind of helpful, but it didn't include possession. So you can drive to Wyoming and buy a gun at 18 and legally own that gun in Colorado and drive around, like all those things, and it's legal. So that we had pushed for that legislation to include possession as well, but our governor is very nuanced in his support of gun violence prevention, I would say. And so it was a tricky situation around possession. The other thing I would say, after the Aurora shooting, we passed the high capacity magazine ban, which is really important. It's different in especially mass shootings. if it sounds awful, but if a shooter has to reload, it actually gives time for people to escape or to attack the gunman. And when they have high capacity magazines, that you don't really have that time. The issue with that, though, is that there are gun sellers that are still selling high capacity magazines, and we're missing a law that we need to be able to have a more comprehensive accountability, and that's state licensing for stores. Right now, gun stores and sellers are federally licensed, and we need to have a state licensing so that the state laws will be easier to be upheld. They'll be easier to enforce. And that is also one of the steps that we need if we want to have an assault weapons ban and have it be effective. It would be harder without the state licensing, from what I understand. You're the specialist in all of this, but that's kind of the working thing with the gun violence coalitions and at the legislature. And as far as something that's working, I would say the ERPO, or the Extreme Risk Protection Order. It works in some circumstances. It's helpful that last session we expanded who can apply, who can ask for an ERPO instead of it just be, it was too narrow when we first passed it. And there are certain, like sheriffs, who in different parts of the state didn't want to do it. So I think the expansion will be helpful. And, but it really is, I don't think there's one thing that's, obviously it's all these different puzzle pieces. And like after the Q shooting, there was a lot of blowback for the DA's office and the sheriff's office in Colorado Springs because they didn't do an ERPO. But those were also actually ghost guns that he had, and which I think makes an ERPO more complicated. So I think it's pretty nuanced, and we just have a lot of work to do.
Great, thank you. Chris, your thoughts?
So I think to carry the conversation forward about ERPOs or red flag laws, they're all the same thing. I don't know if everybody in here sort of is up on the terminology, but the ERPOs are one of the sort of more promising risk-based, there's one of those secondary level interventions, right? Like I was talking about earlier, where the idea isn't to necessarily burden the vast majority of firearm owners. It's to identify through whatever means we have available people who might be at risk of committing violence either against themselves or somebody else, irrespective of whether they own the firearm legally, actually irrespective of whether they own a firearm at all. You don't have to actually own a firearm in order to be the subject of an ERPO. It can prevent the legal purchasing or renting of a firearm in the same way. I think it'll be interesting to see what the expansion does. I don't think we have great data quite yet about whether it's dramatically increased the number of petitions that we've seen coming in. So I have a team at Anschutz who's been we've been doing what's called abstracting. So we've gathered all of the petitions that have been filed in Colorado, whether they were granted or not, through public records requests, and have been just taking pieces of data from them in a systematic way. And so we've seen this sort of gradual increase in the number of petitions that have been filed year over year since 2020. And there might be sort of a bump that'll come from this expansion, and which makes sense to a great extent, I think, because the theory being that more nets catch more fish, right? And maybe it'll fill in some of those gaps in parts of the state that have been reticent for one reason or another to uptake ERPOs in earnest. I think that when you introduce healthcare professionals and mental health professionals, and I include myself in that, I'm actually a licensed clinical social worker by background, the considerations on the part of the petitioner get complicated in ways that I don't know that it does quite the same for law enforcement. When you're talking about family members who are the other class of petitioners who are allowed to file for them, there's obvious complexities there as well. So I think we need to figure that out. Now, thinking about how to improve the sort of the landscape of policies that we have. I mentioned before that all of these problems are multifaceted, so all of the solutions are multifaceted. And one of the things that can potentiate ERPOs in particular are waiting periods. So in some of the work that I was involved with in California, we found that 2.5% of the GVRO, so that's their version of ERPOs in California, petitions actually interrupted a sale, right? Because so it was filed during the waiting period, and because the person had to wait until the end of the waiting period for the background check to pass, they weren't able to pass the background check when they went to get it because the GVRO had been granted. So waiting periods are one of those things that I think seems politically viable. I mean, obviously there's contention about that, but we haven't sort of maximized the utility of them in Colorado.
Great, thank you. Jason, in addition to social media and some of the other things you've mentioned, what other policies do you see that might work?
That's a tough question for me because I think in my community, we get the trickle down effect of policy making. So the effect that I've seen is more kids that come through my door that are referred by courts that don't have any gang issues, never had any gang issues, but now have a gun charge because they're scared of all the bad guys that do have guns. And so it's kind of like a reverse thing that we're needing in our community now, because all of our young people are being caught up and put on the system because they're all carrying guns. The good kids and the kids that need support. Because the good kids are scared of what they see some of these kids have. I mean, I can show you videos of horror stories. You talk about high capacity magazines. I have videos with kids with rifles and guns that look like they came from Call of Duty, but they have 100-round drums with them. And these are 4 kids in a car, a driver with a handgun, and then 4 guys. It's horrifying. The things that we deal with on a weekly basis. We don't even talk about the weekend. So it's a tough question for me with legislation. We need more social media accountability. We need more accountability for people who are selling guns the wrong way. We need more training in our community. You know, there was a conversation a couple of weeks ago about teaching kids to triage. In my community, teaching kids how to stop bleeding because their friends, there's so many of their friends are being caught up like that. So when we talk about policy, just something that keeps our kids safe, something that keeps our kids focused on what they need to be focused on and not scared, something that provides them with opportunities to continue having opportunities in education and employment and other things. So for me, that question is really tough. If anything that I could come answer would be, you know, it's tough because I want to say, giving these kids who don't have issues a break, but then what you're going to do is more kids are just going to carry guns because the laws will be more lax. So I might be the wrong one to answer this question because right now I'm in a storm and I can't see out of it. Right? I mean, I'm in a hurricane and I'm standing right in the eye. And Javon and our staff at Struggle of Love, you know, we respond to shootings. So, you know, when I leave here, I'll be off the clock, but 2 a.m, if there's a shooting, I'll go to it. I'll have to be, he'll have to go to it. So most times it's somebody 21 or under that has made a mistake and carrying a handgun. So it's tough for me. It's really tough for me because I want these kids to feel like they're safe, but a lot of times the answer for them is carrying a gun. So, you know, we have to do a better job for these kids, period, in every aspect of their lives. Make them feel safe, make them feel loved, but make them be accountable when they do, mess up. And I think that's part of it too, because through the pandemic, things were so lax and kids were getting away with everything. I had kids on my caseload with 6 attempted murders, you know, that they were letting out. And I'm like, what are y'all doing? You know, and I'm not for keeping kids incarcerated, but sometimes that's what you have to do. And if you're a kid that has shot at 6 people, there's really no other place for you until you get it straight up here. So it's a tough question for me. And I'm trying to be as diligent as I can in thinking of ways to, you know, that policy can actually help. But, you know, I'm at the end of it. You know, I'm at the trickle down effect. I get it at the end. So, you know, gun laws, you know, don't really affect the guys that I deal with.
Thank you, Jason, for what you're doing and those perspectives. Mayor Kaufman, your thoughts on this?
Yeah. Well, first of all, let me just go. It's, I think, a very good point that myself and Mayor Hancock and Mayor Suthers from Colorado Springs got together before the start of last session and said, what can we agree on to bring down crime in our communities and across Colorado? And I think it was making all motor vehicle theft a felony. It was ghost prohibition on ghost guns. It was, I'm trying to, there was one where what we wanted to do, that there were a number of felonies that were reduced to misdemeanors in Colorado that the legislature done. And state legislatures it doesn't have to be a felony to prohibit somebody from owning a firearm. And so what we thought was, in looking at some of those felonies that were reduced to misdemeanors, that we should also restrict gun rights for those. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so there was that one. I think but another point was that we raised was that and this goes back to your comment, was that the number of youth detention beds have been dramatically lowered in the state, but that we do have, unfortunately, sadly, sometimes very violent young people, and we have so few that you can't mix them with the adult population. And we have so one of the things that we asked for as the three mayors was more youth detention beds to hold people in pretrial that are very violent, because oftentimes what they'll do is they'll failure to appear, they'll miss their court date. And so, but I just, I just think that's something it's a tragedy that we have to do this, but I think it's important that it's something we look at. I think on the, what caught my attention on the ghost gun issue was a situation that occurred in Denver at East High School, where a young student who happened to be living in Aurora before that had a ghost gun that he had assembled, and ended up shooting two administrators who were searching him. And I think, the DPS to reverse their policy on SROs, school resource officers. But he had been in Aurora, and there was concern, and he was really a bright kid, and with the exception of firearms, had never been in trouble. But he had this fascination with firearms. And so what he did, he put something out on Snapchat or something about him and a firearm in a statement. And somebody in the Safe to Tell program turned him in for that. And so the police then searched, with the permission of the parent, his mom, searched his room and found out, his mom didn't know, that he had assembled through a very significant assault weapon. And so he was charged with that. I think he went to Florida. His mom then moved to Florida, but then he came back to live with his father, who lived in Denver, and assembled that pistol for which, and then he turned the fire. He injured the two administrators, but then later turned the firearm later that day on himself. And so what an incredible tragedy. But I think this is DA Kellner, I think, has been good on this issue, and certainly told me that it was he was seeing more and more cases involving these ghost guns. But it was amazing the pushback that we got in the legislature, that, it was hobbyists were putting together these firearms, and they would in fact testify. And a lot of it is just people concerned about, an intrusion of government, and the Second Amendment, that it's I just didn't think it did. And I'm a proponent of the Second Amendment on it. I thought it was a reasonable restriction. I mean, these they're unserialized. You can't trace them. And I think the other issue is on the switch, which I think sometimes I refer to as an automatic sear, where you can take a semi-automatic firearm like an AR-15 and turn it into a fully automatic weapon. which is illegal. It's been illegal for a very long time under federal law. Well, it takes a special license. I guess you could get them through the ATF, but it's a pretty difficult process to get. And I think probably very few people that have them actually get that license. So that's, I think that was a big, I regard that as a big win in the legislature. I'm disappointed nobody from my party voted for it, and even though I testified for it. But and then State Senator Rhonda Fields from Aurora carried the legislation. We're proud of her for doing that. And then just on this extreme risk protection, yeah, I think that's an important tool. And obviously disappointed in the issue in the situation in Colorado Springs and probably other counties. We have elected sheriffs who refuse to use it as a tool, and I think that's too bad. And I think that I really haven't looked at it in real depth, but would the mass shooting in the nightclub have been prevented had the individual his firearms been seized? And it seemed like he had all the red flags there, that person. I mean, there was a prior incident, I mean, maybe more than one, but a very significant prior incident where he was arrested and use of a weapon, where I think he even didn't have his mother as hostage or something.
He actually threatened to blow his mother up.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, and so the police responded, and then of course the mother dropped the charges. But yeah, he had abducted her in their home, and he was going to blow the house up, and so the charges were dropped, and then consequently, she was shot up.
Yeah. Yeah. With a ghost gun. Right.
Yeah.
One of them was a ghost gun.
One of
them was legally owned by his mother.
Okay. That's right.
Yeah, so I'm just being aware of time. There's about 10 minutes left. I have a third question more about politics and common ground. And, we know liberals and conservatives, Republicans and Democrats have different views on this, but I also want to, appreciate the audience for being here. And if you have questions, now is a good time to ask them. And I would just encourage short question. And if you want to target it to a particular person on the panel or the whole panel, and please introduce yourself and your question. And we have a mic, so just here, and Dee Dee has a microphone for you.
Perfect. I just ask that you use the mic so then that way it's recorded.
My question, because as I'm hearing you all speak, I'm hearing that there are a lot of gaps in solving this issue. From Mayor Kaufman, I'm hearing, with the Aurora Theater, that there was psychiatry reports kind of lost in communication. And with other cases, I'm hearing that, people shouldn't have had guns, but they did get them. How do we get everyone on the same page? Because it seems like there's a very large gap in communication between fields and everything like that.
It's a great question. Thank you. Who wants to take that first?
Well, so that was probably more of an aberration. I mean, the system was set up, but the system failed. So that's not necessarily a valid point against the system. That was obviously preceded by quite some time, because that was in 2012, the extreme risk protection order. So I would hope that under the current system, that individual would have been identified and then would have been pursued by law enforcement using that tool. I think that's a relationship between two separate law enforcement jurisdictions that just didn't work out.
Okay. Other answers to that or other questions?
You have to follow the money. I think when you follow the money and start squeezing that, then people start getting in line. So social media companies, gun shows, that come to communities that are struggling with gun violence, like that should not happen. Like there shouldn't even be a question of Tenor Gun Show coming into a hotel, renting out space and just putting guns out for people to come get in a community that has been struggling with gun violence for kids as young as 12 years old for the past 6 or 7 years. That shouldn't happen. And I'm all for capitalism. I am a capitalist. I love money. But, there's gotta be some regulations when it comes to that. Like, honestly, and in terms of, the gaps that we're seeing is, these kids can make their own guns now. They can make them. If they don't have, I can get the latest Call of Duty and see what I love that, and make it at home. And I didn't think it was possible, but I've seen some of this work, and it's absolutely terrifying. Like, it's absolutely terrifying to see a video with 4 young men in a car on a random night driving around with some of the firepower that they have. And I mean, you would be, it makes you, gasp, like, oh my goodness, like, I'm gonna stay in the house tonight. But those are just some of the things that we face in our community, and everybody's scared. Everybody, even parents are scared, and some of these parents are helping these kids get guns too.
But one quick point on that. I think at the time of the gun show, I think people do have to go through background checks. Maybe I'm wrong in that.
Yes, yes.
But it's a father giving a firearm to a son who may not be responsible. And in fact, there's been a lot of horrific stories about parents. Well, there was one. It wasn't in Colorado, I can't remember, but where a kid shot up a school. Where
Sandy Hook.
no, before that. Well, Sandy Hook was one. There's so many examples
Yeah.
of parents giving incredible, very dangerous firearms to their son or daughter for whatever reason. That to me doesn't make sense. It's holding parents accountable for that.
No, I appreciate that. Our provost has a question, and I should say Consencio has been a big supporter of the school being involved with these issues and holding these kinds of events. And so we really appreciate his support on this.
Yeah, I'm asking this question so I don't walk out of here feeling demoralized and and totally powerless. So I hope you will help me here. As I listen to the media and I'm listening to you, it seems we're in this powerlessness situation where on the one hand we have Second Amendment rights, right? So there is law that says, yes, you do have the right to own a gun. And the government should not interfere with that. That's one issue. Then we have good kids feeling like they now have to own guns, even though they probably didn't want to, because they fear that those who have them will come after them and they have no way to defend themselves. So now they are exercising their Second Amendment rights, maybe against their good instinct, that they probably didn't want to have this. And we have all the legal guns out there, and there's regulation that can control how you access them. But now we also have all these illegal avenues for accessing guns. Now, to me, that's like a cocktail of impossible. Is that where we are as a society?
I'll take that.
Question.
Yes, I'll take that one. I don't want to, yes, there are days that I feel absolutely hopeless. There are days that I feel absolutely hopeless because everyone is armed. And when they're talking about us, as we respond to shootings, we're supposed to wear vests now. So we're in jeopardy. We're in danger. It's just spun out of control. And back to what the mayor's point is, when he talked about that young man who, unfortunately, that the incident east. If we have a young person that is going through the court system and has a violent charges, that young person should not be at regular school with our kids. I'm sorry. They need to be at a specialized school. That young man could have easily been at prep, which is 2 blocks away from East, 3 blocks away from East, that has other kids that have those issues. He should have never been at East. And I'm all for education. I'm all for fair education, but I'm all for keeping all of our kids who don't have any business being mixed up with somebody who is having an AR-15 in his room, right? He shouldn't be at school with our kids until he learns how to be a kid, right? Because obviously he's on a whole different level. So I'm sounding like, the mayor now. We may have to start holding these parents accountable. We may have to start holding these parents accountable, because if you're not conscious of your son constructing an AR-15 in your home, in his bedroom, then what are you paying attention to? Right? We can go back to Columbine and Klebold and Harris and what they were doing under their parents' noses, right? So we've got to be parents.
Great.
We've got to be parents.
Great answer to a tough question. Since we're up against time, I want to give each of the panelists a chance to respond to that, and then we'll wrap up. So Don?
Well, one thing I would say actually that I've learned a lot from Jason and other people that are doing the work that he does, is that I think the state needs to invest more in groups and people that are doing that work of violence intervention and violence interruption. And we need to really make investments in, if we're tightening our laws, this was something with the ghost guns legislation, knowing, okay, we're making this more of a penalty. Then at the same time, we also felt a responsibility to invest in kids that are at the risk for violence, and that they see violence and they're traumatized by it and their souls are harmed by it. How do we invest in those kids as a state and say, your life and you are worth it and you have promise? And I think that is missing in our state's priorities, and that we need to make that more of a priority, so that hospital violence intervention, when a kid is shot, that they have the support they need. Are they at that crossroads of, I'm going to seek revenge, or I'm going to try and chart a different path? How do we give hope by investing in those same kids? And I think that the state has an important role to play. There are so many industries that we give money to support, and that's a whole nother conversation. And why aren't we doing that for our youth? And I think that we need to do that. We need to have a bigger pathway also for people that have possibly been incarcerated at some point, but have walked that same path that the kids have walked, so that they then can be role models. How do we remove barriers if those people are not at risk for harming people, but that they have a wisdom and a dignity to their life's experience that then can help the youth today that are struggling. So that's something that we're very interested in focusing on more, and with the help of people like Jason to learn the best ways for the state to do that, I think is a really important direction.
Great, thank you. So quickly, last word, Chris, and then Mayor Kaufman.
Sure. So in answer to the provost's question, perhaps to be the voice of hope. I think that it is easy to feel hopeless and sort of as if this is impossible. One of the things that I think drives me at the very least is the realization, I think, that there are more. It's easy to underestimate the number of people who want to be part of the solution. In some of the granted, in a lot of the work that I do, it's about violence prevention or violence within the context of domestic violence that you're trying to prevent. But let me just reflect very quickly on interviews that I did with owners of firearm businesses, right? So these are people who not only are very often vocal Second Amendment advocates, but this is how they make their living, right? This is how they feed their families. And I remember at several points where we're talking about voluntary storage programs, or what they could do to sort of help a person in crisis, and what their concerns about doing so would be, et cetera. And one of the things that this guy said to me was just, if a guy fell out of a boat, I'd try to help him. So why wouldn't I do this here as well? And so I think it's trying to, and while that seems sort of lofty and aspirational, I think that's the tenor with which we want to try to approach as much of this work as we can, is appealing to people's best nature in trying to find solutions that work, and in specific the kinds of solutions that can be brought to scale.
Great, Mayor Kaufman.
Well, On the optimistic note, this Safe to Tell program has been a godsend for the state. And it has, I believe, it saved a lot of lives. And in fact, I think there was a story that came out some years ago, I'm trying to remember when it was, where I think two adolescent females, and I think it was Castle Rock High School, were plotting to do a mass shooting at the school. And that it was through a tip, I think, from the Safe to Tell program that gave law enforcement the ability to come in and prevent that. But and the person that I mentioned that went to East High School and shot the two administrators, he was initially apprehended in the city of Aurora through a tip through the Safe to Tell program. So so I think it's an incredible. It's just as we have the extreme risk protection for more for adults. That's a vehicle for children. I do worry, I'll be on a negative note, with the culture, and that there's a violent aspect to our culture, and young people get on these video games, and I think have a fascination with them, and it's how many people can you kill in the shortest period of time, and I think that I think sometimes some of them act that out. And your brain isn't quite completely formed when you're an adolescent, and you just don't push the reset button, when you're taking lives like that. And so it's a real concern.
Well, these are great points, and Jason, last.
And I couldn't agree with the mayor more. Like, this is crazy. We're gonna have to get.
All right.
I couldn't agree with him. I couldn't agree with him more. But a lot of these parents that feel like, things have spun out of control, they don't realize it. What they've done is, look, it's expensive to live in this city, and you're working 2 jobs, you go home and you have other kids, and you sit your little kid in front of the TV of a video that you're watching, and he's watching the same thing that you're watching. And then when he gets tired of that, you put him in his room and he has a video game system, and he's Call of Duty, Grand Theft Auto, and all these other things. You've taught him how to do those things, right? Unbeknownst to you, you've taught him how to steal, sell drugs, and use guns just by playing video games. Mm-hmm. And so we've got to do something different with our kids. And when she was talking about community organizations, yes, most of the people that work for my organizations have went through it, right? I'm sitting here with glasses because I was one of these kids, and I got shot in the head messing around when I was, young and dumb, right? But I grew up out of that. And so a lot of these kids, the reason I've been successful, the reason he's going to be successful, is that we've been through it. And a lot of these kids see that, and they know it through their fathers, their mothers. And there's a quote that I use all the time especially dealing with these kids. If you want to know what's on the road ahead, ask a man who's walking back. Right. And I'm the guy who's walking back. He's the guy who's walking back. We've been up that road. We've been incarcerated. We've been separation. We've seen loss. We've been around murders. We've picked our friends up, off the ground. Right. He's lost a son. Right. And so kids come to us, and we're able to share those experiences with them. And for some reason, a lot of them think that's cool.
Dean Teskey, I know we're at times, I want to be respectful of that, but I would just like to ask, I know that there were a few questions in the room that we didn't get to, as well as some questions on Zoom. Do you all have any recommendations on where to take questions from here?
They can call us directly, strugglelefoundation.org. All my information is on there.
Yeah, we'll post contact if that's okay. And okay, no, we appreciate that. And also, I know, thank you. Well, it's a huge topic. We just scratched the surface. I appreciate some of the notes of hope, as well as the challenges that we all face. We are up against time. But we're not kicked out of the room either. So if you don't need to go home or go watch Shaq or the Nuggets, there is some food still in back. And I know our panelists have done us a great service by coming tonight. They probably want to get home to their families as well. But if people can hang around a little, there can also be some, one-on-one and small group chat here as well. So please join me in giving a huge thanks to our panel.